Welcome. I'm your host, Henri Arslanian, and welcome to this episode of the Future of Money podcast. Before we start, I want to say a big thank you to the 500,000 of you who follow my content each week. This podcast, The Future of Money, is now ranked in the top 5% of all podcasts globally on Spotify. Thousands of you from over 160 different countries globally are tuning in each week. So massive thank you for all your support. Also, if you haven't checked out my YouTube page yet, do so because I have a lot of exclusive content on my YouTube page, also available in multiple languages as well. As all of you loyal listeners know, my goal with this podcast is very simple. It's to go deep in some of the biggest ideas, trends, and developments we are seeing in the field of crypto, and hopefully empower you with this information and then let you make your own decision on what their impact can be on the future of money and the future of finance. And to do this, I invite each week one of the leading figures of the global crypto community to have this one-on-one conversation amongst crypto aficionados and discuss some of these topics. Today, it's a very exciting episode, and I'm very proud to welcome Mr. Sam Tabar, who's the CEO of Digital, really to talk about not only what's happening in the field of crypto mining and Bitcoin mining, but also how is this industry shaping and changing as we go. Sam, great to have you with us on the show.
Thanks for having me, Henry.
By the way, Sam, one thing many people know you as the CEO of Digital. One thing people don't know about you, that you're a very avid enthusiast of techno music, especially techno scene in Berlin. So here we go. People often think crypto CEOs are boring people. Sam is a great example that you could also be fun at the same time.
Well, I guess people know about me now.
Well, before we start as well, Sam, there's so many things I want to talk to you. I want to do our regular disclosure. Again, for everybody listening to the show, Digital, BTBT, which is a public listed company on the NASDAQ, is an investor in 9Blocks, which is a hedge fund where I'm a partner in. And also, subsequently, I also sit on the advisory board of BTBT as well. And also, more than that, BTBT may be involved with past or current sponsors of the show. So I just want to put that disclosure out there before we kick it off. Sam, as we kick off the show, there's a lot of things I want to talk to you about. But before we do that, can you mind sharing with the audience a bit more about you, your background, and how you got involved in the crypto space, but also how BTBT and your involvement, how you got involved with BTBT as well?
Sure. Well, I'll make it short about me. I'm a Canadian. I was born and raised in Canada. My father is from Nazareth. My mother is French Canadian, and my parents met in Canada. I went to university in England and Oxford, and then I went to Columbia Law School. The reason why I mention this is not to show off, but because my father was illiterate and my mother didn't finish high school, and so they were very proud of what I was able to do academically, and my happiness comes from their pride of that. So I just wanted to mention, almost like a shout out to my parents for giving me the motivation to do my best. But I did start my career as an attorney after law school. I was in New York at Columbia Law School, and I went to this law firm called Skadden Arps, which is a well-known law firm. And I worked very hard for a number of years. I slept under a desk for a number of years, just billing thousands and thousands of hours because that was what you were expected to do at Skadden. And, it was a very hyper-aggressive law firm. We represented our clients very enthusiastically, very aggressively. And that's been my training, to take on projects and missions and to go the extra 10 miles, not the extra mile, but the extra 10. So that's been my training when I started my career. But then I realized, being a lawyer is frankly kind of boring. I didn't want to be a scrivener of footnotes for the rest of my life. And I wanted to get involved in, the deal making side of things. But before that happened, I came across a weird and wonderful opportunity to be in-house counsel to a Japanese hedge fund. And they asked me to move to Tokyo, which I did. And very quickly, when I worked for them, I started getting involved on the business side of things. To make a long story short, I was involved with that Japanese hedge fund for about 7 years. In fact, I think you and I crossed paths.
Exactly.
And this was about 15 years ago. And so, we did very well. I ended up raising quite a bit of institutional capital for the alternative products in our hedge fund, from private equity to public equity, and really got to understand the entire spectrum and scope of financial services and financial products while I was working at that hedge fund. Why? Because I was very engaged in speaking with institutional investors and understanding exactly what they wanted, what future liabilities they had to meet. And I went back to our hedge fund and we created those products to meet those demands. So I reverse engineered what had to be done. Instead of selling the products, I tried to understand what the institutional investor really needed. And then we would build that and go back to him or her. And that ended up being very successful. Then Bank of America, Merrill Lynch poached me. They asked me to be their head of capital strategy, and I was responsible for their entire Asia Pacific region. And then one day I went to Burning Man, and I had a bit of a shift in thinking. And this was around the time when a very mysterious character, Satoshi, who invented Bitcoin, came out with this white paper. And this was around the time I went to Burning Man at the same time. And I realized that blockchain could actually end up rewriting the entire financial system. And the financial system was something I've been basically protecting as a lawyer and a banker for 15 years prior. And I thought, maybe working for the empire isn't that great. So I wanted to join the rebels. and I co-founded a company, a blockchain company called Fluidity, which created a product called AirSwap, a decentralized exchange, which ended up being very popular. And we ended up also tokenizing Manhattan real estate. We were the first to do that. And the Harvard Business School actually published a 10-page study based on our pioneering activities of tokenizing Manhattan real estate. We ended up selling Fluidity to Consensus. We had amazing backers at our company. We had Joe Lubin, who was the co-founder of Ethereum. We had Michael Novogratz, who, as you know, is the CEO, founder of Galaxy. Anyway, we ended up selling that company successfully to Consensus. And I had an employee, her name is Annabelle Huang, and she was friends with some folks in China who founded this company called Digital, the company I'm currently CEO at. And they were looking for executive management talent in the US. And she had referred me, said this guy, Sam Tabar, will be your guy. And so we met. I met the co-founders, and to make a long story short, I've become CEO of the company. And I'm really happy and flattered and proud to help build this company. And we're doing really great things, and we've got a great track record, and we were executing on things that no one's ever executed on before.
That's amazing. First of all, what a journey from, I think your parents would be very proud as well to see their son as a CEO of a public company. But it's amazing, actually, you're right. We crossed paths in your hedge fund days when you were at Fluidity. And of course, I know Annabelle as well, very well, from Amber to now. So it's really funny how the crypto circles, I tell everybody in crypto, your reputation matters, and who you know. And it's really incredible how this is often the case. Can you tell us more about BTBT, Sam? Because I think there's a lot of crypto mining shops out there. But what is BTBT or Bit Digital, and what does it do, and how is it different from other mining shops that people may know in the space?
We started as a publicly listed Bitcoin miner, and we're listed under NASDAQ. And there are other publicly listed Bitcoin miners out there. So many people invest in Bitcoin miners because it's a proxy, it's a securities proxy for Bitcoin. It's basically kind of investing in Bitcoin on steroids, because you have this miner, the miner has thousands and thousands, in our case, 35,000 computers doing the hard number and crunching calculation of generating a Bitcoin. So when you have that kind of scale, you're able to generate Bitcoin and put it on your balance sheet, and you keep it on your balance sheet. And if you're a publicly listed miner, the capital market participants invest in your ticker as a proxy to Bitcoin, because you're holding all that Bitcoin on your balance sheet. But two things that we noticed. First, we noticed a couple of years ago that a lot of the generation of Bitcoin is being made on fossil fuels. And there was this noise that was happening where the environmental argument was holding a little bit of traction, that Bitcoin miners are hurting the environment, which, I'm very sensitive to. I'm an environmentalist at heart, and I certainly do not want to be involved in any activity that harms the environment. So we looked into this, and I mentioned it to the team, and this was 2 years ago or more. And I remember people looking at me saying, "What, you're saying that we'll make a green Bitcoin? What's a green Bitcoin, Sam?" And I was like, "Guys, this is something we should really take this into consideration." So we ended up taking it upon ourselves to make sure that wherever we parked our machines, that we were sourcing clean sources of power, whether that's solar, wind, hydro, volcanic. We made sure that we parked our miners where we were drawing from clean sources of power. But having said that, I do have some opinions about this environmental argument that I'd be happy to get into at the right moment. And another thing that we're doing, the second thing that we're doing that's different from other Bitcoin miners. And by the way, ever since we started this whole environmental thing, all the other publicly listed Bitcoin miners jumped on the same bandwagon. And I'm fine. I'm totally happy that, our actions help shift the industry towards making it a point to go towards clean sources of power when we're generating Bitcoin. So I'm not upset that our peers did the same thing, because at the end of the day, it's about the environment. We don't want to hurt it. But the second thing that we're doing that no one's copied us on yet, it's probably too fresh, is we have been able to figure out the equation of 1 + 1 = 3. And what do I mean by that? Well, we've invented a business model. It's called the Digital flywheel. And no one else is doing this. What we do is that massive fleet that I talked about, the Bitcoin miners, we take the profits from the generation of those sustainable Bitcoin miners. We take all those profits, we put that into, we have all these digital assets on our balance sheet. We put that in Ethereum, not all of it, but about half. And then we stake the Ethereum, and then we take the rewards from the staking and we pour that back into our Bitcoin mining operations. And it creates this perpetual flywheel of making money. So this is something that no one else has done. And the reason for that is, well, there's a few reasons. First, there's a tribal mentality. A lot of Bitcoin people are maximalists. They think that anything outside Bitcoin is just forbidden. And a lot of Ethereum people have a very, dim view of Bitcoin. And so there's a silly tribalism that's going on. We thought there's no sense of having this tribalism. You could actually put the two together, which we did. Take the Bitcoin mining profits, put that in Ethereum, stake the Ethereum, take the rewards from the Ethereum, put that back into Bitcoin mining operations. That is not anything that any other publicly listed Bitcoin miner is doing. And we think that's important. You know why? So there is this talk right now in the United States to ban staking as a service. And a lot of US shareholders are going to be wondering, how can they stake? Like, they could stake for themselves, that's legal, but staking a service is not. So people are looking to our ticker as a proxy for staking as a service. Just like MicroStrategy was a proxy for Bitcoin at one point, people are looking at BTBT as a proxy for staking, because we're doing it in a way that no one else is doing it. No other publicly listed entity is doing it the way we're doing it. So they look at our ticker not just as like Bitcoin on steroids, but also to stake Ethereum as a proxy. So this is something that is surfacing, and it's a business model that we've invented.
And do you think, when you think about the future of crypto mining, do you think the model that you guys have pioneered at BTBT will be the model to follow, where there's obviously Bitcoin mining, proof of work, and there's proof of staking, or you think that it'll evolve otherwise in different ways? Do you think other firms will basically copy you on this innovations that you guys have done?
Well, I'm not sure if they'll copy, potentially. But one thing that publicly listed Bitcoin miners will be forced to do, especially after the halvening, is they'll need to understand that they have to invent business models that's not completely correlated to the price of Bitcoin. what keeps me up at night is making sure that what we're trying, all our innovations need to be inversely or at least not completely correlated to the direction of Bitcoin. So, we invest in these market neutral funds, as you know. We invest in these market makers. We have this Bit Digital flywheel. The Ethereum staking is unrelated to the price of Bitcoin. So we view our balance sheet not as some sort of extracurricular activity, but we look at it very seriously. And we really work our balance sheet so that it is not running too much in the direction of where Bitcoin is. And if your business is completely correlated to how Bitcoin is doing, you're not really using your brains. You really need to be creative and create business models off your mining business that's not completely correlated to where the direction of Bitcoin is. Otherwise, you're not producing alpha value. That's just pure beta value.
And you're right, especially as it becomes easier for institutional investors to get access to Bitcoin and crypto, right? Then the value proposition for a lot of these miners will go down. I want to touch upon the ESG argument you mentioned about, the ESG push that you guys have made early on. And to your credit, I remember very early on at BTBT, this was one of your selling points, right? It was really the ESG element was something you guys were pushing. There's been obviously a lot of criticism recently, not only from people that are crypto skeptic, but also in mass media. I remember a recent article in the New York Times, for example, that tried to criticize Bitcoin miners, saying that actually the arguments that the industry makes that it is, ESG friendly, that a lot of the mining is happening from renewables is actually incorrect. What is your response to that, to those individuals and media outlets who claim that actually the ESG cover that the industry is giving is actually incorrect?
Yes, there's certainly some false narratives. In fact, Senator Elizabeth Warren wrote us a letter, including, I think, 5 or 6 of our peers, directly to our company, making demands on data with respect to the sources of power that we use and so on. And there is certainly a false narrative happening, particularly in the New York Times and other publications. And I will get into that in a moment. But I will commend, there are some publications like the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg. They have deeply covered what Bit Digital has done, and they covered it fairly accurately. So it's not every single news publication, but some. Look, I don't know if you know this, but video game playing takes more energy than Bitcoin mining. But nobody is calling for the banning of playing video games. No one is. And I understand some people will say, well, I enjoy video games, but I don't see the value of Bitcoin. This position is a very US and European-centric view. If you look at the currencies of Argentina and Lebanon and other countries where their currencies are losing double digit, like in some cases, 75, 80% value against the US dollar, how are people supposed to save money in an environment where your currency, your local currency, not the US dollar, not everybody lives in a US dollar world. And that's what Americans forget often. They can't store value. The work that they do, they can't store value in their local currency. If they store value in Bitcoin, at least they have a fighting chance, because there's deflationary forces in Bitcoin. There will only be 21 million Bitcoins ever. There will be not more than that. And it's a hyper transparent system as to the whole Bitcoin system. It's a revolution in accounting, frankly. It's an accounting system that's completely transparent for the entire world to see.
But on the ESG element, though, I mean, do you think the accusations that the numbers that of how carbon free these miners are correct, or they're incorrect?
If you look at the data very deeply, it's incorrect, and it's a politicization. At the end of the day, Bitcoin is a counterculture movement, and legacy interests particularly financial institutions, Jamie Dimon and all the politicians that are funded by the existing financial system, they make this environmental argument. It's a fake environmental argument, and they know that's going to divide this counterculture movement in crypto, in Bitcoin. And it's just a very disingenuous position to politicize a nascent technology because it's threatening the existing financial system.
Yeah.
Imagine being told how to use the power of your outlets. Imagine politicians saying, "Look, you cannot plug that socket in the wall if you're playing a video game." This is a question of freedom. It's not. It's really extraordinary. And to politicize Bitcoin mining, especially when it doesn't take the energy that folks do. And by the way, there's a difference between energy usage and carbon footprint. You could take a lot of energy, but it doesn't mean that you're using a lot of carbon footprint. So, for example, we haven't really mentioned this to the world, so I think this is almost an exclusive for you, is now 99% carbon free. 99% carbon free. It takes a lot of energy, but we use volcanic, we use hydro, we use wind. We're using clean sources of power. It's taking the energy, but it's clean. It's not damaging anything. So there's a difference between energy usage and carbon footprint. We're not using fossil fuels and so on. So there's some nuance that people aren't capturing because the headlines don't capture that. And the headlines are just these headlines to create like this doom idea that Bitcoin miners are hurting the planet, which is completely untrue.
Which is interesting because, like you mentioned, video games often think about ChatGPT, how much electricity that consumes, but nobody brings that up at this level, right? But Sam, for the benefit of our audience, could you share, obviously you mentioned there's a difference between electricity consumption and carbon footprint. Can you maybe share with us, and even for myself, what is the difference between being carbon free and being carbon neutral from that perspective?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. There is a big difference between carbon free and carbon neutral. And I personally do not believe in carbon neutrality. Carbon neutral is when you create damage. So let's say I'm doing a fossil fuel activity. I'm doing an activity that's producing fossil fuel. Then they're in the market. You buy these carbon neutral certificates, and you're offsetting the damage you've done. That's not exactly don't create the mess in the first place. Just use a clean source of power in the first place. So that way you don't have to buy a certificate to neutralize and offset the carbon damage that you've done. So carbon neutrality is not something that this is another nuance that is not being captured by a lot of the people. I always emphasize, hey, we are carbon free. We're not carbon neutral. I don't believe in carbon neutrality. Don't create the damage in the first place. So that's another thing that we do. And we have noticed that a lot of our peers are saying, oh, we're carbon neutral. That's a red flag. Don't create the damage in the first place. Be carbon free.
So how do you guys do it actually? How do you guys ensure that you are carbon free and you're able to stay like this on a sustainable basis? And do you believe that the future of Bitcoin mining will be a carbon free Bitcoin mining?
Yes, I do believe that in the future, Bitcoin miners need to use the technology of the future, which is renewables. It's silly to power a future technology with old sources of power. Use new sources of power, wind, volcanic, hydro, solar. It makes sense to use the latest technology in power to generate digital assets. That makes a lot of sense. And one should do that just as a matter of principle. And I believe that publicly listed miners will do that. And I do hope that they do not use the carbon neutrality as a way to sort of skirt the issue. But going back to the question on how we do it, what we've done is we hunt for various partners across the world, in our case, the United States, and then we recently have been going to Canada and Iceland, and I could explain why in a moment. But we look for various operators, sort of, and we create like a landlord, sort of like a lease. They're the landlord, and we're the tenant, and we have all these tens of thousands of miners, and we park a fraction of them in these various vendors around the world, and we make sure that these vendors are using clean sources of power. So we have one example where a lot of our miners are parked in Buffalo near the Niagara Falls. And that particular facility draws power from the Niagara River, all hydro, and it generates the power to power our miners, and then we get the Bitcoins. So that's just one example. And recently we've gone to Canada and Iceland. And the reason for that, unfortunately, is because of politics. We feel that in the United States, Bitcoin mining has been politicized, and we're starting to feel uncomfortable. Now, you have to remember, Bit Digital actually started in China. We had our fleet in China, and we decided to start migrating our fleet in the middle of COVID to the United States because we thought it was a very big jurisdictional risk to have our entire fleet in China when China can just simply one day say Bitcoin mining is banned. So we did that 6 months before the ban was announced. Half of our fleet was migrated. And when they announced it, we had to accelerate that migration and put all this in ships. So kind of a James Bond operation, frankly. Put all these machines in these ships, and we rushed it out and we brought it to the ports in the United States. And again, I don't know if you recall, but during COVID, the supply logistics system was out of whack. So it was a very cumbersome effort to get all these miners in great condition and to park them in various places like Buffalo and Nebraska and so on. So just going back to the jurisdictional risk, we're very sensitive to that because that happened to us in China. And so when we hear that noise where politicians are politicizing our industry, we take that very seriously, just as we took it seriously in China before they announced the ban. So we started putting our fleet in Canada and Iceland to hedge that jurisdictional risk.
I mean, when you look at Bitcoin mining globally today, Sam, obviously China used to be the world leader, and post the ban in China, the US has become the global leader in Bitcoin mining. What do you think is the future of Bitcoin mining in the United States? Do you think post some of the recent events and announcements that were made, we will see migration out of the US? We were thinking this is just temporary thing until governments change and let's say decision makers are replaced.
It's a complicated question. I would say that the government of El Salvador invited Bit Digital to come to El Salvador, and we did. The government showed us these various places where Bitcoin mining can take place. The reason why we never moved forward in putting some of our fleet in El Salvador, even though it's a very pro Bitcoin environment, is jurisdictional risk. Like we're very comfortable in places like the United States, Canada, and Iceland because there's rule of law, and you know what you're signing up for when you're signing a contract, and there's a process, there's due process and arbitration if there's an issue. And places like in El Salvador, although I'm very supportive of what the leadership is doing there, the rule of law still needs to evolve a little bit. And so we were uncomfortable with that. But we do think that in the long term, developing nations are going to get sick of the US dollar because the US dollar has been weaponized. And they are currently looking for alternative ways of storing value. And they're looking at alternatives of the US dollar. And I do think countries will begin to open their doors towards Bitcoin mining as a way to generate the local economy, but also help build an ecosystem that is an alternative to the US dollar. That's my thought process. And I think that might happen in places like Latin America and Africa.
The argument, though, Sam, a lot of people would say is obviously, yes, you're right. You can call on, there's a lot of electricity available in places like Canada, El Salvador, they have volcanic electricity sources available. The argument a lot of these policymakers would say is that Bitcoin mining does not create much jobs. Yeah, you have your rent space, you have your miners, and yeah, it creates Bitcoin, great, but it's not as if you're setting up a startup or hiring 25 people and you're training people. What's your response to that? Does Bitcoin mining provide real value add when it comes to human capital and knowledge transfer in jurisdictions where Bitcoin miners are set up as well?
This is another, it's a funny argument because no one ever talks about the power usage of TikTok. And TikTok has these massive data centers. Whenever you post a TikTok video, it takes a lot of power, believe it or not. And there are these massive data centers that TikTok has, and they're not; those centers are not creating that many jobs. There's just a bunch of machines. No one's talking about that, but they'll talk about, wait, Bitcoin miners. Basically, it's just a data center. It's the same thing. I would argue that we're providing more value than TikTok videos. So I just don't understand this like unfair double standard question. Oh, you're not creating as many jobs. But data centers don't create that many. They create some jobs. They create infrastructure investment, but they're mostly machines. So why are you picking on this industry? Why don't you pick on all the other industries and technology that use data centers, which is the majority, frankly?
Correct. No, it's a debate that I've had with many people. I think you raise very interesting points, right? Like not only ChatGPT, but gaming and others, right? Why is crypto being picked on? And I would argue in a certain way right now, if you're a politician and you stand up for the crypto community, I mean, it's suicide, right? Because there's no public support much of crypto right now.
Yeah, I would add, Henry, if you look at our website, I don't think we have the word crypto on our website. And I think crypto in a way is sort of like if you recall, when the internet was invented, we used to call it .com.
Yeah.
So I think crypto will be like the word .com. .com became a dirty word after 1999, after the crash. And so I think
e-commerce, digital payments, exactly. They got rebranded.
Now it's called the internet. I do think that crypto will probably be phased out as a word because of the branding. Those people in legacy finance have successfully tainted the word crypto. Yeah. And so that's why I use digital assets or I use blockchain technology. I don't use crypto because of the branding.
So, Sam, one last question in 1 minute before we move on to our fireball round of questions is, what is the future? When you think about the future of Bitcoin mining, if we have this podcast being recorded in 5 years, how will the industry look like?
Well, look, I do think that, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be only using clean sources of power. And I think Bitcoin miners will actually create innovation in optimizing clean sources of power. The power industry is actually very sleepy, but Bitcoin miners, those people are not sleepy. So we've been creating innovations in a very sleepy industry. So I think that Bitcoin miners will invent technologies to optimize the usage of power, particularly clean sources of power. That's one thing. But secondly, I think also that as time goes on, younger people have normalized Bitcoin and other blockchain digital assets or crypto. A lot of younger people, they don't even open up a securities account. They open up a wallet. They trade crypto. And as the younger generation move into portfolio positions of power, where they actually construct the portfolio of family offices and so on, Bitcoin and Ethereum, those things would have been there. They see those things as blue chip stuff. That's something that's completely normalized. They're not going to go after. They're not going to be touching gold as an inflation against as a hedge against inflation. They'll use Bitcoin, which is a much better proxy for inflation than gold. By the way, look at the environmental destruction that gold does. Look at that. Bitcoin is a far superior proxy for gold. Yeah. Nobody actually knows how much gold there is in the world, but everybody understands Bitcoin, and that's digital gold. That's a way better proxy for hedging your inflation as a family office or a banker or so on than buying that useless metal called gold.
Yeah. I have to say, Sam, on that point, I talk about it in my book as well. But I mean, a golden ring produces about 20 tons of waste, and I think it's one topic we don't often talk about is the
child labor.
Exactly.
The violence that comes with setting up gold operations in these developing countries.
Exactly.
Bitcoin doesn't do that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, Sam, as part of our tradition, my bell is with me here. This is going to be the minor today, and will keep us honest. So, I'm going to do quick questions, and I need 1 or 2 word answers to my questions. Are you ready, Sam?
Okay.
Awesome. Let's kick it off quickly. What excites you the more about the future of crypto?
The young people who are going to take over.
If you had to take a bet on who is Satoshi, do you think it's a man, a woman, and where he or she is from?
Ooh, I think this person is Canadian, and I don't wish to get into the gender.
Interesting. Yeah, that's talk about controversial topic. Canadian, that's interesting. Here we go. I'm sure many of the Canucks listening to the show.
I'll tell you why. Well, look, I mean, like, all the famous people from Vitalik is Canadian, Joe Rubin is Canadian, Elon Musk is Canadian. He's Canadian, by the way. People don't know that. So all these people, a lot of technology comes from crypto technology comes from Canada. People are not really aware.
I'm sure many of our friends in the Canadian government will appreciate these comments. Let's move about. You're a big fan, as you mentioned in the intro, about techno music. Who's your favorite techno DJ?
Dr. Rubinstein.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
I will go check it out. You spent a lot of time in Berlin, including the techno scene. What's your favorite thing to do in Berlin?
Going to Berghain.
Here we go. To our German friends out there and Berlin friends, here we go. Best nightclub in the world?
Berghain.
Here we go. Man, we should get them as a sponsor of our show soon. You mentioned Burning Man, where you discovered the crypto. What is the one piece of advice you give to anyone going to Burning Man?
Be self-sufficient. Rely on yourself.
Here we go. You mentioned tribalism earlier in the show. What is your message to the Bitcoin maxis? If you had one message to the Bitcoin maximalists, what would that message be?
Grow up.
Oh, I love it. Sam Tabar, if you're not in crypto, what other industry you'd be in? If you're not in crypto, what other industry you would want to be in?
Politics.
Oh, interesting. Hey, maybe Canada will take you on with all the nice compliments you're giving there. What is your favorite thing to do when you're not working, when you're not CEO of BTBT? What's your favorite thing to do?
Just hanging out with friends and connecting.
Love it. And last question, Sam Tabar, the CEO of Bit Digital, BTBT on the NASDAQ. Sam, the traditional question on the Future of Money podcast. Sam, if you could have lunch or dinner with one person dead or alive, lunch or dinner with one person dead or alive, who would he or she be?
Satoshi.
At Burning Man, potentially. Sam, great to have you with us. Where can people learn more about you and BTBT? How can they find you, and where can they learn more about yourself?
Sure. I mean, we have a website, and our ticker is BTBT on NASDAQ. And if you Google Bit Digital mining, they'll find us and our website. And there's an email address in that website. Please reach out. I'd love to hear from you.
I have to say, Sam, I've known you for over a decade, and I learned so much about you, not only your personal history, but even your love of techno in Berlin scene. This was awesome. Guys, thank you very much. Hope this was an insightful show for all of you. Again, make sure to subscribe and give us a rating. It really helps in more people discovering the show. And also make sure to check out our YouTube page with a lot of exclusive content there available. Again, we know what to search for, Henri Arslanian, and you'll get everything there. Thank you very much, everybody, and see you all soon for another episode of the Future of Money podcast. See you guys soon.